This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm XXII and it is Saturday, so that means it's time for another edition of my History of the Banned and Restricted list. We started with this series looking at the very first year of the list, way back in 1994, and now we're on part 22, where we are examining the cards that were added to the banned and restricted list in 2015. In our last episode, we actually looked at 3 years together, 2012, 2013, and 2014. This is a time where the game had some impressive balance, as there were only 4 cards banned in that entire span. That was the best 3-year span in the history of the game. However, in 2015, it began to become clear that Wizards was pushing cards pretty hard. While only 4 cards were banned or restricted in the year of 2015, 2 of them had to get the hammer in multiple formats. That said, 2015 is a pretty tame year compared to what we're going to see in the remainder of this series. For example, in 2019, there were more than 25 cards banned. But I think 2015 shows the beginning of a trend of new cards with new mechanics being pushed a little too hard, and therefore, most sets began to mess up multiple formats on an increasingly large scale, something we're still seeing in 2020, unfortunately. The first announcement came in January 2015, and it featured 3 cards being banned from Modern: Dig Through Time, Treasure Cruise, and Birthing Pod. In the same announcement, Treasure Cruise was also banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage. Let's start with Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise, as the 2 cards have a lot in common and were largely played in the same decks. So, Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise were both printed in 2014 in Khans of Tarkir. That set revisited a mechanic that had been previewed way back in Future Sight, Delve, which was the mechanic of the Sultai on the plane of Tarkir. This mechanic allows you to exile cards from your graveyard to pay for colorless mana in the card's casting cost. That should probably have very quickly resulted in a red flag for Wizards. Mechanics that can utilize the graveyard as a resource and mechanics that reduce the cost of spells tend to be pretty dang powerful, and Delve does both of those things. There's an argument to be made that Delve is actually the most broken mechanic ever. In fact, it came in at number 1 on my MTG Top 10 on the most broken mechanics, which use empirical data to rank all mechanics. There are only 22 cards with Delve in the game, but 12 of those have placed highly at premier events, and most of them have tons of points using my scoring system. If you want to know more about Delve in particular, I would direct you towards that video. Anyway, let's talk about these 2 cards. Dig Through Time offers you an instant speed way to draw 2 of the top 7 cards of your library, potentially for only 2 blue mana. And Treasure Cruise can be a sorcery speed ancestral recall if you have the graveyard to help pay for it. Now, to Wizards' credit, in Standard, Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time were merely very good cards, not utterly broken ones. It wasn't super easy to stock your graveyard in the Standard of the time, so people weren't doing super silly things with these, like casting them on turn 1 or 2. But you know what? It isn't very hard to load up the graveyard in virtually any other format, and as a result, these 2 cards became staples for blue decks in Modern and Legacy, while also seeing some considerable play in Vintage. Blue is already a super powerful color in those formats, and Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time made the blue decks in those formats way too good. With a larger card pool, you have access to lots and lots of cantrips and self-mill to load the graveyard. In Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, the biggest recipient of these powerful spells were Delver decks, which already loaded up on lots of cheap cantrips and didn't really have to change their game plan at all to fit in these 2 powerful card draw spells. It's also a very funny coincidence that the deck was already called Delver because of Delver of Secrets, but these 2 cards have the Delve mechanic. The deck became so powerful that it really didn't have anything that could challenge it, except another super powerful deck that got banned out of existence with this new announcement too, which I'll talk about later. So, Modern especially became incredibly homogeneous and imbalanced, so these 2 had to both be banned to fix it. At first, only the Cruise was banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage, but later in the year, in September, Dig Through Time was also added to those lists, as it had simply replaced Treasure Cruise and Delver decks in those formats, and they were still too good. These cards are still banned and or restricted in all of these formats. So, yeah, the banning and restricting of 2 powerful Delve cards was something of a sign of things to come. We'll see some other new mechanics take over formats as we continue in this series. So, in addition to both of these cards being banned and or restricted in multiple formats in 2015, there was another card banned in this announcement, though this only got banned in Modern, and that card is Birthing Pod. Birthing Pod is a powerful artifact that can be cast using Phyrexian mana, which means it's super easy to cast and super easy to use its activated ability, and that activated ability is just a powerhouse. It lets you give up a creature in play to grab another one from your deck with a converted mana cost that is 1 mana higher. Birthing Pod decks were the best deck in Modern of 2014, even beating out Delver decks, and there's a couple reasons for that. One of these is Birthing Pod really lets you tutor up toolbox creatures way too easily. You can find whatever is most effective on a given board state at any moment, and that's pretty powerful. The deck ran lots of Singleton Silver bullets for that purpose. Basically, Birthing Pod decks were aggro decks that sought to win with creatures and could always find the best creature for any situation somewhere in its deck, and that is very powerful. You could also just go up a chain of increasingly powerful creatures who had strong enter the battlefield abilities and win that way. But what really pushes the pod over the edge is how easy it makes it to assemble creature card-based combos. So these Birthing Pod decks in Modern could just sort of curve out and search up powerful creatures whenever they wanted, but they could also make a combo win come together very easily. The most famous of these generally involves Melira Sylvok Outcast, Viscera Seer, and either Murderous Redcap or Kitchen Finks. Melira makes it so that the two persist creatures can't have -1/-1 counters put on them, and that means that every time you sacrifice one of them to the Seer, it comes back right away without the -1/-1 counter. And because those creatures will never have those counters, they can just come back as many times as you want them to, be sacrificed, and repeat. The Redcap can do 1,000,000 damage, or the Finks can gain you 1,000,000 life. This is a 3-card combo, something that is frequently Magical Christmas Land territory, but Birthing Pod basically made it so that every day was Christmas, because the combo really was not hard to assemble, thanks to the pod. So, when playing against a Birthing Pod deck, you can try to defend against the combo or aggro toolbox plan, but it's pretty difficult to operate on both axes. That's what made Birthing Pod decks way too good for Modern, and why they got banned out of existence in 2015. These days in Modern, there is a deck that's sort of a spiritual successor to Birthing Pod. It uses things like Court of Calling and Collected Company to do the same sort of thing, but it is nowhere near the consistent powerhouse that Birthing Pod was. So, only 3 cards got banned in January of 2015, but Delve and Treasure Cruise messed up a whole bunch of formats first, and Birthing Pod was really screwing up Modern before it got banned. There would only be one other card banned or restricted in 2015, and it was Chalice of the Void, which got restricted in Vintage in September of 2015. So, Chalice of the Void is a prison card. It makes it so players just can't play spells with a certain mana cost. While Chalice has been played in many formats, it has never been banned or restricted in any of them other than Vintage, and that's because the Chalice was extra good and extra disruptive there. Artifact-heavy decks like Ravager Shops all started running the Chalice, and really, lots of decks, even non-artifact decks, started running the Chalice because of the effect it could have on the game. Between tutors and being able to run 4 copies of the Chalice, way too many Vintage games began with a Shops player, or again, really any player, dropping Chalice of the Void on turn 1 for 0 mana. In Vintage, there are a ton of 0 mana spells, like the Artifacts of the Power 9, and whoever went first was straight up winning the game way too often, because they would lock the opponent out of the ability to play their Power 9 mana rocks. This led to some players starting to steer clear of the Moxen and Black Lotus. This is especially problematic for the Vintage format, and not just for power reasons. Vintage is all about the Power 9. It's the only format where they are legal, and people playing Chalice on turn 1 was making it so people couldn't play the very cards that are sort of the symbol of what Vintage is all about. So this banning was as much about making games less homogeneous and uninteresting as it was about making sure Vintage was a format where you could actually play the Power 9. Chalice is still restricted in Vintage today, and it seems incredibly unlikely that that will ever change. So those are the cards that got banned or restricted in 2015. While there were only 4, the Delve cards in particular stand out as a pretty big mistake, at least for formats that weren't standard. Next time, we're going to look at the entire year of 2016, another year that created some serious problems in Modern as a result of new, highly pushed cards. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you see future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the other 20 plus episodes of this series, You should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.